Good afternoon. Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today's date is March 2nd, 2015. Can we please have roll call?
Commissioner Jimian? Commissioner Camargo?
Here.
Commissioner Hale? Commissioner Yao?
Present.
President Chan?
Present. Next item, please.
2 consent items. A, approval of the February 2nd, 2015 meeting minutes.
I have no changes. The rest of you? No? Okay. Please have the minutes approved. Next item, please.
3, GWP Commission staff comments.
No comments? Comments? No? Okay. Next item, please.
4, reports information. A, drought rate report. Atene Hartunian. Mike?
Mr. DeGhetto is going to give. This was more specific to the drought rate that went into effect yesterday, March 1st. There had been a 6-month moratorium imposed by the council at the time that the new water rate structure was put into place. So March 1st marked the date when the drought rate went into effect. And as we had indicated at the last meeting, we'd come back and just give you a little update on that. We've sent out notifications to our residents. Did we get those to the commissioners, or is it? Yeah. So each of you should have that, plus the mandatory water conservation information. But Mike's going to just quickly go over the drought rate scenario as a reminder and where we're going.
Madam President, members of the Commission, my name is Michael DeGhetto, Assistant General Manager for Water at Glendale Water and Power. And I wanted to give an update today on the drought rates and the drought charge related to that water conservation phase that we're currently in. And you have a copy of the letter that was sent to the customers, as well as the brochure that was sent to the customers.
Yes.
And I'm going to read through my notes just so I can make sure the dates are correct. It's very similar to what's in the letter for anyone that's watching. On July 29th, 2014, the Glendale City Council adopted a new water rate fee structure that went into effect on September 1st, 2014. In anticipation of an extended drought in California, the new rate structure also included an additional fee or drought charge. The drought charge is specifically related to drought conditions and would go into effect upon the approval by the City Council of any of the 4 phases of our mandatory water conservation ordinance. The purpose of the drought charge is twofold: to keep the utility financially secure should California enter in a prolonged drought period and revenues from consumption declined in response to mandatory conservation, and then also to encourage water conservation among all customers. The drought charge was designed such that customers who met the curtailment target would likely not experience an increase in their total bill. In an effort to buffer the effect of the rate increase on Glendale residents, the City Council deemed it appropriate to delay the imposition of any applicable drought charge for a period of 6 months from the effective date of the new water rate fee structure. And since it is widely believed that the drought will continue through at least November of 2015, the 6-month moratorium on the drought charge ended March 1st, 2015, and stage 1 of the drought charge took effect. So all residents will receive a letter stating the drought charge, along with a copy of the mandatory water conservation brochure that provides conservation tips and information. And as I mentioned, the copy of the letters in your packets. So currently, we're in phase 2 of the mandatory water conservation ordinance, where there's a drought charge of 75 cents per 100 cubic feet. And it's going to apply to all customers, basically starting on March 1st, this weekend. And we would continue to urge residents to conserve as much water as possible. And we want to thank all the customers for their continuous water conservation efforts. And of course, for more information, they could visit our webpage at glendalewaterandpower.com.
Madam President, in the letter, we indicate that there's a statement that says it was widely believed that the drought will continue through at least November 2015. It's not so much the drought. We actually think it may go longer than that. That's the California State Water Resources Board declaration. Their original declaration was this past summer, and we believe they're going to extend that through November. And it could go further than that. That's just the next likely, or the next break period for that. We're also, as you recall, MWD was here, talked about looking at what their actions may be in light of the end of the rainy season, which we are in the middle of right now. But it sure looks like there isn't enough rain, and even if it was to rain significantly the next couple of months, it's not going to get enough for where we're going to need to be. So it looks likely that they're going to implement some sort of a restriction on their water supply distribution. The state water project today announced that they are going to up their allocation to California, as MWD staff had indicated they felt they would. So that's going to happen, but that's not going to be enough to help us. So we're looking at this likely being in place for a while, and it looks very, the potential is great that we may have to increase where we are from this particular phase to phase 3, but we'll address that once MWD releases their final report and what their actions are going to be. And then we take a look at how that's going to impact us and what we need to do going. As you recall, the drought rate was tied directly to the mandatory conservation. So it's in place when mandatory conservation is placed, and it goes away when those are lifted. And the reason we did that was so that it was specifically tied to the rate, but not an ongoing burden. If you recall, where we struggled when we did the rate structure was how to cover our fixed costs. And we had, at that time, it was a 70-30 split, 70 being the water consumption, 30 for fixed. And quite frankly, we just need to make sure that we guarantee that we can cover our fixed costs even when there's ups and downs. Now, for us to change that even to 60-40, as you recall, what I told you was a significant impact to the ratepayers forever. It doesn't go away when the drought or water supplies, the drought ends or water supplies go up. That would have been in perpetuity. So what we decided was to attach the drought rate surcharge that would be in effect only during those periods when we had mandatory conservation, so that there would be some relief to the customer once those were lifted. So that's pretty much where we are with that. It is in effect, as Mike said, and it will be until council decides to lift the mandatory. As you know, we're always in phase 1. Phase 1 is that's in place at all times, but that is the voluntary phase. So there are no rates associated with that. But if phases 2 through 5 go into effect, there is a drought rate associated with that, and it increases as the restrictions get more intense, more restrictive. So if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the report. My first question is, so it started yesterday?
Yes.
And about when should our customers expect to see their bills?
Well, it'll be on the next billing cycle for how many days that in that billing cycle that the individuals had the drought rate in place, and then so you could see it right away. I don't know, Tammy.
So within maybe
when the next bill goes out?
Within the next couple months?
Today. So there's bills that go out today.
Oh, there are bills that go out today.
So
okay.
You'll see people have a few days on it.
Just a few days on it.
All the way up to, it'll be only for when it was in effect. So as the new bills go out, they will see it for whatever amount of time it was in that particular billing period.
Okay.
So it'll probably be as we get through this first initial period, kind of clear through that, and then it'll become part of everybody's ongoing bi-monthly bill from there.
Right, yeah, and I understand, all of our customers are already aware of this, and they've received plenty of communication on this. But at the current time, can you remind me and also our viewers where they can go for information or additional classes or programs that we have?
Sure. GWP directly, we have our website has quite a bit of information. We also, in the brochure, you'll notice there is some, not only our regular water website, but we also have 2 other WaterWise sites that they can go to. They can call us directly. We will be happy to correspond any way necessary to get people more information or help answer their questions.
And do we have plans to maybe allow payment extensions or anything like that for our customers who may have hardship? I'm just curious.
There is inherent in our billing system the ability to contact on an individual basis our folks and see if there's a need to work out some sort of a payment plan. It's not something that we have, that we like to do to, as a regular practice, but for those that we find themselves in a temporary situation for a billing period, they can contact our customer service folks, and they will try to work with them.
Okay. All the questions I have. No?
Thank you, Mr. DeGhetto and Mr. Zern. So a couple of follow-up questions. One is whether you've had any response to that. I know this has been in the works for some time, but any response to the letter going out? And then also if there's sort of an average customer impact, the bill impact on once you calculate the charge.
I haven't had any feedback on the letter to date. I'm sure as some of the bills start to go out and the letter starts to populate a little bit more, we'll probably see some comments to that. What the objective of this is if the individuals were to abide by the mandatory conservation and meet the reduction goal, their bills should be about the same. It wouldn't be reduced, but they also wouldn't go up. So they should be seeing a leveling of their bill with the proper participation or meeting the reduction guidelines. So that's kind of the average that we put out there, whatever that average single-family bill is, and we had examples of that in our rate structure. But the idea being with the drought rate, if folks are meeting the reduction, they should see their bill about the same, if not a little bit lower, but about the same. Those who don't, obviously, are going to pay a steep premium, and we'll see it go higher. For those that aren't conserving, they're definitely going to see an increase in there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeGhetto. And Mrs. Zung, just have some questions on, I'm curious about the information that was given to the City Council for them to finally adopt this drought rate. Because we didn't see the report that was sent to City Council.
Yes, sir, you did. It was in the rate structure. So we presented you the full rate structure prior to going to council. You made a recommendation to council.
Was any updated to the impact to GDP financial if the drought rate wasn't in effect?
The moratorium was put in place, and it took no council action to change that. So the moratorium was for 6 months. Unless the council took action, they would not have, it would go immediately on March 1st into effect, and the council took no action. So.
Okay, that's why I don't recall hearing any discussion on the council on whether they should adopt this or not.
All the discussion was that particular night when the rate structure was adopted, because the drought rates were in that, and at the same time, if you recall, council moved to phase 2 of the conservation policy, which is the first phase of mandatory. So what they said is that they did not want that immediate impact to be so great to the ratepayer with new rates going into effect in September and the drought rate going into effect right away. They asked for a 6-month moratorium for us to hold off on the drought rate. So that 6 months ended, obviously, the end of February went into effect on March 1st, and without any other action, it becomes automatic.
So it sounds like with council's discretion to extend that 6-month period, they had that option.
They could have, yes.
They could have. So what would have been the impact if council took action and not proceed with the drought rate?
We've already lost $1 million, and we would have lost $2 million on the year. So it would have effectively reduced the reserve balance that we had shown you by half, and likely would have wiped out our pay-go capital, the ongoing.
So the GDP financial.
That's 6 months. Excuse me, Mr. That would have been 6 additional months. Anything beyond that would have begun to cut in to the point where we would have probably lost all of our reserves.
Right. So I hear that you lost $1 million in 6 months, and potentially, if this didn't go into effect, you would have lost another $1 million.
Another $1 million this year, and that would, like I said, that would have taken out the pay-go capital for sure. So we would have probably had to stop our capital program after the bond proceeds were expended. If you recall, one of the things that council asked us to do, or what they approved, was a little bit lower cash reserve policy in this particular rate structure as a way to try to minimize the impact on the rates overall. So instead of building up a bigger reserve, we took a more conservative approach to the reserve. So that didn't leave us a lot. So anything that we lose as a result of this revenue loss, it'll go directly to the reserve, which then will affect the pay-go capital. Those would have been the immediate impacts. If it would have continued on beyond the 12-month period, you would have begun to see it erode the rest of the reserves, and then we would have started looking at negative operating
Did council ever give you an indication that they would like to maybe be presented with the scenario again and what the financial impact would be, or do you provide that?
I sent the city manager an overview of the financial projections. So he had that information, but no, there hadn't been any other discussion about that.
Yeah, because I guess in the future, I'll be interested in having that information presented to the commission so that we can at least make a recommendation to council whether to extend that based on impact to the GDP operation as well as the city financial. If we can make that make a recommendation before council.
I don't know. I have to ask legal because that was already passed by the council. The recommendation from the GW Commission had already taken place.
Had a discretion to adopt it or not adopt it.
We'd have to look at the specific wording in the ordinance, which I don't have before me, but we can take a look at that and see what latitude there is for the commission to consider and make a recommendation in that regard.
Right,
whether it's left solely in the discretion of the city council versus whether there's a little bit broader language.
Right.
Because they had already adopted the rate structure.
Oh, I agree.
Council has
totally
the discretion to change it at any time they so desire. They could go back and abolish the rate structure if they wanted, but that was included in the rate structure they had already approved.
But in the interim step, this is like a big deal. I'm not sure if all the ratepayers are aware of this drought rate because the discussion hasn't been discussed within 6 months. So I assume that most people, since this letter came out on Friday, I don't think most people received it yet. I think it will trickle in this week, and by then you'll hear more about it. So
I'm sure we will.
Yeah, I'm sure so too. But I think council should at least let the public know that they did discuss it, and even though they didn't take action, they should at least address it one way or another. And so I think based on this commission, we should make that recommendation to council whether they should adopt it or not. And I think because of whatever council suggests, that if it's appropriate, then I think we should have done it.
Well, then I'll take that on as an action item to look into the wording in the ordinance, and I can report back as far as what the commission can or can't do with regard to the drought rate.
Right. So potentially, if we can discuss that, we can potentially have that recommendation to council whether to continue adopting this drought rate or maybe rescind it potentially.
Potentially, we'd have to, as I said, we'd have to look at the wording in the ordinance and see whether that's within the commission's purview to do that.
Right. Do other commissioners feel that there's a need for this body to address that issue and make such a recommendation?
I don't personally feel that's necessary because it was approved by council last September. And, they put a moratorium 6 months. And I actually, seeing this, I am not surprised. However, it would be great if we have, that option, opportunity or ability to, but I'd be okay if I don't. I don't know. How about the two of you?
I've had several discussions in the last 6 months about the drought rate. I think for the most part, people that are interested know. People that are never interested don't know. Making a separate announcement by the city, the letter serves that purpose for the most part. I don't feel that we need to any additional suggestion.
So I guess my perspective is this is a significant drought that we're in, and I don't think we took any of these actions lightly, and I think we need to live with this for a while. I would not be surprised if there was some amount of reaction to the actual implementation, even though those have been coming for some time. But people do have in their control. The one thing they can't control is their consumption. So, after what could be an initial shock, there is the ability to correct it on your own as a consumer through your own usage. But it's an extreme drought, and so it seems to me that this is something that's warranted.
Well, I agree, but based on the tier structure, I think to help people conserve, that sends a better price signal than a drought rate where it impacts everyone. It seems like this drought rate applies to everyone regardless of conservation. Mrs. Sun mentioned that if you reduce more, you should break even. But potentially, if we were to send a price signal based on conservation, it should be paying more at the higher tier rather than applying a drought rate for everyone which impacts our low-income customers the most.
And quite frankly, you got to be careful how you set the tiers, first of all, in the overall COSA situation. But again, it goes back to the fixed costs, and the fixed costs don't see one, type of user over the other. Our research has shown, and Craig, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we're not expecting this impact is going to hit the low-income folks the same way it is others, but it's really going to hit those that don't conserve. That's who's really going to get hit the worst.
But don't you agree that this drought rate applies to all customers?
It does apply to all customers. It needs to apply to all customers because it covers the infrastructure that serves all customers. But at the same time, those who use more water will pay more in the higher tier rates. They'll pay the drought rate plus the higher tier rate. So they're going to see quite a bit of a penalty for that. So if that causes them to conserve and bring themselves down into the lower tiers, and we've accomplished a lot by doing that as well. But at the same time, we can't see ourselves going to, you recall when I stepped into this job, there's $21 million deficit in the water department. And I don't know any other way to get that money back except you got to go out, you cut costs to a certain extent because you can only cut so far, and you raise revenue. Those are the two ways to do it. And I think we did a really good job in how we balanced it and tried at least to limit the impact. And I think council did an excellent job in how they spread that out over the, what our reserve would be versus what our pay-go capital would be, what would be the different tiering rates. And our water rates are right today competitive with every other water agency in this general area. So I think in that respect, we did a really good job. Revenues are coming in pretty good. We're beginning to pay down that and obliterate that deficit that we had. But at the same time, we can't see ourselves go right back into that situation. And that's the unfortunate part of conservation is that, the fixed cost of the infrastructure don't go away. They're there. To the extent that we can reduce operating costs as a result of the drought, and our staff has done a great job in looking at lowering levels in reservoirs, trying to alternate pumping schedules so that we save some money in that particular regard, and then we can pass that on to the customer. But at the end of the day, those fixed costs are very expensive, and we have to pay for those. If the drought continues, we could see ourselves right back in that deficit situation, and that's certainly not where I want to be, and that's certainly not where the city wants to be. So it isn't an ideal situation, but it's certainly one that I think is necessary in order for us to keep the business of Glendale Water going. And as I said, we wrestled with how to do that. We could have split the fixed cost variable cost ratio. It actually probably would have been easier to do it that way from a rate structure standpoint. From a COSA standpoint, I think, Christine, we were good at a 60-40 split, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, the impact was tremendous on the ratepayer. Just that switch from 70-30 to 60-40 was tremendous. And that's there forever. That doesn't see drought, doesn't know drought. So we thought as unpleasant as it is to have to pay more, better that we tie it directly to our own internal policy on conservation versus an across-the-board in perpetuity charge.
No, I agree with that. I think fixed charge percentage should be low. 30-70 seems adequate. But I was thinking about sending a proper price signal at the higher tiers, because I'm not sure, I don't recall discussing that, where tier 2, 3, or 4, I think we would get rid of tier 5 though, right? If those can be embedded with this drought rate so that the tier 1, potentially tier 2 can be excluded from that, so the people are conserving already. I mean, how much lower can they go if they're cutting their budget to the bare minimum and they can't conserve anymore because they install everything they can? How can you charge an additional fee to those customers who have done all they can to conserve, whereas the tier 3 and 4 customers have a higher way to go? And so the drought rate should be embedded in tier 3 and 4. So I wasn't sure if we discussed that in the past when we decided that.
Well, it was part of our overall review and how we developed our COSA and within the confines of the laws that we're restricted to. You got to be careful that one particular area can't and tier can't subsidize another. So that's a very, very fine line you walk. And it doesn't see conservation, unfortunately. That's one thing we learned. So if it looks like upper tiers are subsidizing for whatever reason, then we could find ourselves in a precarious situation. So we structured it the best way we could within the confines of the law with the best interests of our ratepayers. And again, those that are conserving the most will pay the least. Those who aren't conserving will pay a premium.
Okay, I have a question. What is the base year? What are they comparing to? What year to cut the 20%?
We used, Craig will help me here.
Okay.
We used the same base year the state did. The base year for the water consumption on the reduction is...
Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. The base year would be the year before the new rates went into effect. The way we had designed it is, there was a proposed rate increase. If you saved the 20%, your bill would be what it would be had we not gone into mandatory.
So is that 2013?
Yes. So the rates would have been mid-2013, so you look at it to 12 months
2013.
before.
So if your bill was going to go up to $78 as an average customer, if you saved your 20%, your bill would still be $78.
Are you comparing to the month in 2013?
Monthly.
No, for instance,
There's not a
my
comparison.
next bill is going to come in April, okay, for the month of March usage. Am I comparing to my March usage back in 2013 to look for that 20% drop?
You would compare it to what your bill would have been under the new rates in September 1st. So you could take the bill calculator we had and
September
calculate
1st.
your bill.
But that would be like a different season. How do you take that into account? Because that's summer. Your September bill would include your usage in the summer, and then March would be in the winter.
It was an annual average bill.
Annual average?
Is what we were looking at in doing the comparison. If your bill was, say, $72 in June.
Average,
and it was going to go up to, say, $78. Okay, so your bill, on September 1st, that's where your bill should have went. With the mandatory, if you saved the 20% and we added the 75 cents per HCF, that average would have stayed at 78. Am I making sense?
So it wasn't benchmarked. It's just what we're
Right.
saying is based on our calculation, if you reduce the 20%, you would see it right away. So we didn't use a baseline number for that.
So
Use what
you're
your annual number
dropping
is.
you're dropping the 20% from your average use for that base year, 2013.
Yes, that's
Okay.
essentially. And most people have reduced, say, 8 to 10%, so their bill is lower than it was going to be projected to be. So.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone knows how to look to see whether they did get the 20% drop or not, because a customer could just go back a year or 2 years that month and actually look at their bill. And
They would,
so this
if
is
they
good.
have questions, they'd all call us and we'd help them figure that out.
And I'm sure that'll generate a lot of questions on that.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? No.
No, I guess even though I think we decided that we might not need it, I would like council to continue looking into whether we have that option, so for future reference as a precedent, we can discuss those type of options in front of this commission.
I will do
Sure.
that.
Yes, please do. Next item, please.
4B, legislative update.
Madam President, members of the commission, Ms. Pashahe will come up and give you a overview. And as I mentioned at our last meeting, some staff will be going to Washington, D.C. this next week, next Monday. So we are joining forces with other agencies that we're involved in with SCAPA to talk about primarily, that's APPA, so that'll be power-based federal legislation. And Michelle has here primarily state-based legislation that she has coordinated with our lobbying firm. And we're early on in the process, but obviously if there's any, and I'll leave this to Ms. Godinez as well, if there is a recommendation to support or oppose anything, we can get that recommendation from the commission today. Is that right? Or
Well, we've got this on the agenda as information only, so we couldn't do that. However, I think we're still very early on in the legislative season where bills are just being introduced.
Right.
So we could certainly bring it back as an action item if this commission wants to make a recommendation.
That might be the way to do it then. If you just flag a couple of them you'd like some more information on, then we'll bring it back in an action item and you can have us put together support or opposition letters for the council.
Sure.
Right. Good afternoon, Madam President and members of the Commission. My name is Michelle Pashai. I'm a program supervisor. To start off with AB 2188, I wanted to give you an update on where we are with that, solar energy permits. Currently, we have already met with the Building and Safety Department as well as legal. And the ball is rolling to establish an ordinance, and the due date on that is September 15th of this year. So that's in progress.
Commission may recall this is the expedited permit process projects. So that was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor. So primarily the fire department, the fire marshal are involved in this along with the building officials. So Ms. Cadenas has been so gracious as to help them get the legislation. We have till June, is it?
Has to be adopted by September 30th.
Okay.
So
we'll get that done, and then it really falls almost squarely on the shoulders of the building and safety. We'll coordinate on an interdepartmental basis for inspections, but really it falls to building and safety and the fire marshal.
Okay.
I don't know if this is the right place to ask. I would like an update on the solar program.
The overall solar program,
Yes.
just our subsidy or our grant program.
Right.
Yep. No problem. We'll do that. We'll probably when we get to look ahead, we can
Yes.
remind me. We'll put it on
next
there.
time. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll continue with AB 401. It's Low-Income Water Rate Assistance Program. Basically, this establishes the Low-Income Water Rate Assistance Program within the Department of Community Services and Development. As introduced, the bill would require DCSD to develop a plan for the funding and implementation of the program, which basically would provide rate relief for lower income ratepayers. Currently, we're on watch with this, and we'll keep you posted with that.
I'll just add, the Commission may recall, through electrical rates, we have the public benefit charge, which is a pool of money that we can put together, and part of that is we can use it to subsidize for low-income senior disadvantaged homes. And that's where we have a subsidy program, and that's where it comes from. There is no such program in water. Water falls under 218, and 218 is much stricter in how you deal with that. So you're seeing some programs that are coming to fruition. There's actually some existing already that allow you to use either outside pools of money or the ability to spread it over some ratepayer base to try to give those same kind of low income or special needs, special assistance programs for the water side of the business.
So this legislation will allow Glendale Water and Power to have a low-income discount customers?
It has the potential to do that, right?
How come we mention Department of Community Service and Development?
That's where the money comes from.
But they would filter the money down to each water agency to qualify low-income customers.
The money has to come from some other source. So it can't come from our ratepayers. We can't, we can't have one body subsidizing another. Even in the greatest, most altruistic scheme, you can't do it. So the money has to come from another source. In electric public benefit charge is a separate charge specifically designated for those kind of programs. That's one of many programs it can be used for. So this is an equivalent or somewhat equivalent on the water side. So the money has to come
Where
from
would CSD get the money from?
From us.
Oh, so they
From all, they'll just do it. I'm sure we'll be charged in some way or other through, however, a surcharge on how we purchase water or a surcharge on how it's developed or how we pump water. That's my guess. And then that'll be distributed back to be used in this format. I'm sure they're not just giving us free money on this.
So couldn't we maybe lobby this bill where we say that the local water agencies will have the right to set its own program, collect money like the electric side, and then distribute that through collect it through the public benefits charge, and then we distribute it to our customers as we see fit, rather than collecting it for CSD and then have them distribute it back to us?
That'd be all new legislation. You'd have to have somebody up there carry it for you. I haven't seen anybody interested, but yeah, we lobby. We can again seek our local legislators and say, would they be interested in carrying that kind of legislation forward to create a similar public benefit charge for water? And if they're interested, maybe. If not,
Wouldn't it just require an amendment, or at least if SCAPA or
SCAPA is only power.
SCAPA or CMUA or whoever that we work with, we can maybe suggest those type of amendments so that we can control our money. Because if you send money to the state, like CSD, that money might not potentially be coming back to help our customers. If the state goes to a deficit again, they might just say, hey, this is our money, we're going to go to the general fund. So having that potentially in legislation, saying that the local agency collects and distributes their own money rather than having the state be the keeper of the funds.
We can make the suggestion, I guess.
Who would you make a suggestion to it, Ms. Fashavi?
No, we'll talk to our lobbyist about it, and we can ask them the question and see what their response is.
Yeah, because I imagine the city council would want to control that bucket of money rather than collecting it as a tax to the state.
I don't know about that, or if that's even possible. But public benefit charge is an across-the-board state charge that every electrical customer it pays, and then that's distributed back to the cities based on population, Craig, or based on the size of the utility.
I thought the city council sets the benefits charge.
They set how it's spent. They set how we spend the money.
Every electric utility collects a public benefits charge. Let me clarify that. The IOUs are a little different. Public utilities or municipals, they collect their own and manage their own. The state manages, I believe, the IOU monies.
Through the CPUC.
Yes.
Commissioner Yao, I think what you're describing is consistent with the City Council's approach, which is generally that it likes to retain control of its spending. That's definitely the case. The challenge with this particular piece of legislation and any sort of subsidy in the water context is Prop 218, which prohibits shifting of costs from one customer to another. So the concern, if we have control over it and how the funds are dispersed, is that becomes our liability if there's a violation of Prop 218. In the electric side, you've got Prop 26, but the public benefit charge legislation predates Prop 26, and Prop 26 is not retroactive. So that's the angle there. But here, we'd have to be very careful. I think, like I said, City Council does like to maintain control, so what you're saying has some validity.
So this legislation can't supersede Prop 218?
No, because that's in the Constitution.
Yes.
So this would be under that.
Very much. That's the big issue. So that's why that's very specific about low income and how the money is raised and how it's distributed. That's why they're being very, very specific about it. It comes from a different source. It's totally outside your rate structure. You don't collect it. You don't put it into your rates. None of those things. But we can certainly ask the question.
So would GWP be supportive? Because it says watch, but are we supporting it, or would we oppose it based on as it is?
Neither. Right now we're watching it, yeah. Because there's also already some existing legislation that we're checking on to see how that affects us, and if this is something that could this be an added burden to us. We just want to make sure we've checked everything first. So we're not proposing to support or oppose it at this point. We're still watching it.
In the future, as the discussion develops and the intent for legislature is known, would you be inclined to have a position, though, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bill number AB 1471, this is passed as Prop 1. And currently in this process, they're distributing $7.5 billion, which includes the increase of statewide water shortage projects and Bay Delta Conservation Plan. This will directly benefit the MWD, which trickles down to us. So we are currently monitoring the updates of availability of funds for this on this project. SB 143, the Diamond Valley Reservoir recreational use. This allows recreational activity, which includes bodily contact in the water, which is part of the MWD system. So we are monitoring that as well as MWD. SB 350, Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act of 2015. Basically, this establishes the quantity of electricity products from eligible renewable energy resources be procured by each retail seller for specified periods. Currently, we're watching this along with SCAPA. Moving on to AB 21, California Global Warming Solutions Act, Emissions Limits Scoping Plan. This requires the State Air Resources Board, no later than January 1st, 2018, to recommend the governor and the legislator a specific target of statewide emissions reductions for 2030 to be accomplished in a cost-effective manner. This, again, SCAPA is watching along with us. And last is SB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act emissions limit. This requires the State Air Resources Board to approve a statewide greenhouse gas emission limit that is equivalent to 80% below the 1990 level to be achieved by 2050, as specified. Also authorizes the State Board to adopt interim gas emissions level targets to be achieved by 2030 and 40, and states intent that legislature and appropriate agencies to adopt complementary policies and ensure long-term emissions reductions. And this is on SCAPA's watch list as well as ours.
I think it's safe to say that SB 350, AB 21, and SB 32 will be hotly debated for the remainder of this year. These are issues that not only affect the electrical industry, but also the petroleum industry, building industry, the property management industry. So a lot of debate about this as we go forward. So we'll continue to watch it as well. And this impacts not only GWP, but also some other operations within the city, building and safety, public works. So we'll all be watching this very closely.
May I ask, I'm sorry, how is SB 32 different than AB 32 when it was signed by the Governor Schwarzenegger?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How is SB 32 different than AB 32 that was signed by Governor Schwarzenegger back then? Or is it just an updated bill?
It increases it. It's making it more restrictive.
But which way? By, let's say, 1990 level?
Yeah, reducing your emissions even more.
Yeah, because I recall it's the same 1990 level by 2050. Is that not the same as 32?
I don't believe, I think it's less than 80% though, isn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't 80%.
It wasn't 80%.
From what I can recall, yeah. It was not 20, it was not 80%, and then they also did not mention 2050, I thought.
And I don't think they had interim measures either, so they're actually asking you to have pegs by 2030 and 40 as well.
Yeah, so
So
slightly different.
it's generally the same thing, it just tightens the restrictions a little bit more.
Strange.
As does SB 350. I mean, currently we have an RPS. There are state energy codes for new construction. This is just tightening it up. It's going from 30 to 33 to 50. It's taking old buildings and retrofits on energy efficiencies instead of just new buildings. It is talking about the reduction of the overall reduction in the use of gasoline. City, which is in the state, which is a new concept. So that too will impact the city in many different ways, because the likelihood is you either have to get people out of cars, have more electric vehicles on the road, or you have to have cars that have engines that are more efficient in their burning of gasoline, which then reduces overall consumption. Likelihood is that those cars would cost more. That's our thinking.
So wouldn't SB 350 impact the decision on continuing to operate Grayson Power Plant? Because the bill says 50% renewable by 2030. And if we operate Grayson, wouldn't that impact that bill where we need to?
No, Grayson's local generation. It has many other uses. It'll impact what we go out on the market and buy, and the potential for us to be involved in other projects. Whereas if it was at 33, we're almost there right now. We would be more selective in what we looked at. But Grayson will still need to be. It'll need to be there for spinning reserve. It'll need to be there for local control. It'll need to be there for emergencies. Plus, we have the ability for generating landfill gas produced electricity too, which will help in this regard as well. So we're using landfill gas now, but to the extent that we can use it more effectively and efficiently, that's part of our IRP.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Thank you so much for the update. It's very interesting. Next item, please.
4C, Electric Reliability Report.
Mr. Avedian.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the Commission. My name is Varojan Avedian, Principal Electrical Engineer with Glendale Water and Power. I'm here to present to you our reliability performance for the past 5 years in comparison to IOUs and POUs as well. We'll start with SAFE. SAFE stands for System Average Interruption Frequency Index. What that means is the number of outages that the customers, Glendale customers, can experience within a year. And our goal is to stay at 1 outage or less. And as you can see, 2013, and on average, basically we are below 1 and doing much better than the other IOUs, with the exception of San Diego Gas and Electric. The next index is SAIDI, which is System Average Interruption Duration Index. What that means is the outage duration for an average Glendale customer if there is an outage. And our goal here is to stay below 40 minutes per outage, and we are meeting our goal and performing much better than the IOUs. As you can see, we are below 40, about 37, 38 minutes per outage, and compare us to PG&E, they're well over 100 minutes per outage. The next index is CAIDI. CAIDI basically stands for Customer Average Interruption Duration Index. And what that means is on average, restoration time for customers who actually experienced an outage. And again, our goal for CAIDI is to be at 40 minutes or less. And as you can see, we're performing much, much better than the IOUs. Now, let's compare ourselves with the same indexes to POUs, such as Burbank, LA, Anaheim, and Riverside. The first look at the chart, basically you would think that, or it looks like that the other POUs are performing better than us. But to put this into context, SAFE is not an easy index to measure. As we convert more feeders from 4 kV to 12 kV, we're putting more customers on individual feeders. And the more customers we have on feeders, every time we have an outage, we have more customers impacted. For example, comparing ourselves to Burbank, we are right about 1, and Burbank is about 0.3 or so. We have certain feeders with over 4,000 customers on them. Comparing to Burbank, their average is about 400 to 600 customers per feeder. So every time we have an outage, we have almost 10 times as customers impacted as Burbank. Comparing SAIDI to other utilities, again, our goal is 40 minutes or less, and as you can see, the purple line, we are below 40 and performing better than most of the utilities, again, with the exception of Burbank. And again, the reason is they have smaller feeders than we do. The next index is CAIDI, comparing to POUs, and we are meeting our goal, and compared to other utilities, we're doing better. This is basically a number that we are really proud of. This is one of the benefits that we offer as a community utility. We have local troubleshooters who come out during an outage, restoring service as quickly as possible. Now let's look at the summary of outages broken down by cause. Basically, we analyze every outage to determine whether the outage was preventable or non-preventable. And if the outage is preventable, we identify the root cause of the outage. The reason we are doing that, we want to prevent that from happening again. And our goal for preventable outages is to be at 25 outages or less per year. Last year in 2014, we had only 15 preventable outages. And if you get the average for the last 5 years, we're about 15 outages per year. So we're meeting our goal on that respect. As for non-preventable outages, that's almost over 65% of our outages total. For example, mylar balloons and wildlife animals like birds and squirrels, I mean, that's just those three alone, those are 30% of our outages. Another major contributor for outages are trees. And we are being proactive on that respect. We have a vegetation management program that we trim our trees away from the power lines to keep them away from the power lines and to prevent outages during windstorms and rainy conditions. Speaking of windstorms, I mean, that's another overhead wire contact and palm fronds. Those are usually happening during windstorms. And we have a program that we analyze coordination of our feeders, the coordination of protection devices on feeders. What that is we look at the coordination between distribution fuses with each other and with the substation relays. And the goal is to minimize outages as much as possible. If there's a palm frond contacting the trees, if there's a fuse, we want the fuse to operate without the substation relay minimizing the outage to a smaller area. And overall, basically, we want to take advantage of our modernization projects such as recloser program, 4 to 12 kV conversion, and again, coordination of the fuses and relays to minimize outages in general to a smaller area and minimize them to a local area closer to the source of the outage. And as you can see, in the last 5 years, we had 286 outages in total. With that, I hope this gives you a good perspective of where we are as far as reliability. And any questions for me?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Avidian. Can you expand on the pie chart, the previous slide on the unknown? What are some of the unknown factors that the utility could identify as an outage?
This is basically when there's an outage, we send troubleshooters out, and if they don't find any evidence of an outage, we can't determine what the cause was. Basically, they go out, they don't find any evidence, we close the feeder, it holds, and...
But an outage occurred in the first place, right?
Outage occurred in the first place, but we couldn't. Sometimes that is, for example, if there's a mylar balloon, I mean, can be that they can't find any evidence, or was a tree branch, I mean, during windstorm that they can't find. So if we can't find an evidence, we call it unknown.
That's a pretty high percentage for everything else. Yeah, I'm just surprised because when we install smart meters, high fiber optic cables, I mean, doesn't that also help with identifying outages and the source of the outage? Yeah,
basically, when we are installing new feeder relays, I mean, those are state-of-the-art devices. So we can identify, we can get a lot more information as far as what the cause is, the actual cause. If the troubleshooters can't find any evidence, there's no way for us to determine what the cause was.
The meter can't tell you it was a squirrel, a bird, or a balloon. It can tell you all kinds of facts about timing, when it occurred, where it's located, how to isolate it down to a smaller area. And there are times when you look at it and a guy goes up a pole and he can't tell. And if there isn't a dead animal, or there isn't a balloon, or there isn't a tree branch that's recognizable, you don't want to guess. So, sometimes if you don't find the animal and you look at the wires and can tell they're chewed, then we can make the assumption that it was some kind of varmint that did that. But If we can't, we don't guess. We just
So right now,
say it's an
you don't see a
outage.
dead animal out there, and you assume it's not caused by squirrels or birds. You don't see a Milo balloon, you assume that's not a balloon.
Correct. We don't make any assumption at that point unless we can find a definitive answer as to why it happened. We'll go ahead and just chalk it as unknown. It's an outage, and it's treated appropriately, but as far as categorizing it, can't make a clear indication on it. We don't guess. And literally, those things that you see that are listed, we find them, see them. They are a balloon we take out of there. They are a dead animal that we have pictures of, proof of, those kind of things. So, a car accident, whatever it might be.
Do you have an overview of before and after we made these investments in our systems, like increasing our voltage lines and adding maybe highly smart feeders and systems in place? Did we experience any increased reliability because of those?
Oh, absolutely. Going to SAFE, let's go back to SAFE. Our number in 2014 was very close to 1. If you go back to 2005, our number was higher than 2. So the investments we made in the past 8-9 years have paid off big time. Looking at the Sadie and Katie, especially Katie, our outage minutes or outage duration was well over 2 hours back in 2005. Now it's below 40 minutes. That's all because of the coordination projects that we are doing, all the improvements we are making, even the 12 kV conversion, separating the phases from each other. That gives us another layer of reliability.
No, those are good points. That's why I asked, because we want to make sure the public knows that the utilities investment is paying off.
Right.
And we'll continue to see that improvement as we have the outage management system coming online full scale. Well, actually, the pilot program is due this year, and we'll see that as it begins to assist us in not only identifying quickly, but able to also remotely, in a lot of cases, deal with some of the outages so that we don't even have to wait for crews to be dispatched. Some of it can be done remotely, which can get a lot of people back online.
Right.
So you see when we have outages, I think it's just the great work that our folks do. You'll see number of customers affected. It'll be like, I'm going to give you a number, 1,000 customers are affected. And in just a very short period of time, they have that winnowed down to maybe 200. Then from there, bang, 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 it's down to less than 100. And then, if you can get it to the very focused point, you may recall when we had the windstorms earlier this year, there was a big issue where we had a tree come down and snap 2 poles, 3 poles actually, and tear the line down. They got it down to 10 houses and just like that. Now, the lines were still damaged. The poles, the guys were there all night long fixing those, but they got it down to 10 homes really quickly so that those 10 homes were the most impacted, but the least number in that particular. So they do really good work.
Okay. No other comments? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Update. Next item, please.
5, oral communication.
We have no oral communications. Next item.
6, agenda forecast.
Okay.
So we have everything pretty well lined up. You wanted
solar.
President Chan to add one thing.
Yes, the solar program update.
So I think we could do that. Where's Mr. Keenan? Craig, we can do that next month, right? I think we can.
The solar program
An update on our solar program.
Okay, so in April.
The strategic plan quarterly update, as you recall, we rolled that in with what used to be our KPI update. So the strategic plan is still relatively new. So this will primarily be a KPI update, but it ties with our strategic plan.
I don't see a KPI update mentioned
No,
here.
we changed it all to say strategic plan quarterly report. We folded the KPIs into our strategic plan, our new revised strategic plan. So you see that in.
Strategic plan quarterly report, that's July.
Well, there's one in April.
Is there one in April?
Yeah,
oh,
first
yes,
item.
yes. Okay, I see it.
So that first one is going to be primarily a KPI update because we still are getting our strategic plan cranked up.
Now, last month, I think we talked about recycling water presentation.
For the April.
That was for April. Yeah, I don't see it on here.
I just call it the purple pipe update in my notes.
Oh, okay, purple. Oh, I see. Yeah.
But It's not on there. Maybe you guys wrote it into the water conservation update, or?
No, it should be separate. We'll
Should
just add
we,
it
should
on.
we include that? Okay, so the purple pipe or the recycling?
Recycling program.
Yeah, recycling, yeah.
Recycled water program.
Water
I should
program,
say.
yes.
Distinguish it from the Public Works recycling program.
Okay, all right, so that should be included in April. Did we also talk about the water bond?
That's the capital improvement project update that you see in May.
Okay, so that's May. Okay, that's good. All right. Other than that, yeah, it looks good. Is there anything else that the rest of you would like to add?
Just a question. So when we were going through the legislative forecast, legislative update, there was some discussion at the beginning of that conversation as to whether or not we might get to a place where we want to recommend action. I don't think, given the conversation, we got there. But if we did want to, it seems like we would need to put this back on the agenda, not just as an informational piece, but for decision-making. So it's really a question for the three of you. Is there, would you want to revisit that next month?
We'll actually bring it back to you because we're watching everything. It's so early that we didn't have any positions. So we'll bring most, if not all of them, back to you.
But when would staff be able to craft a position, or at least decide if they're going to be?
I'm not exactly sure, Mr. Yao. As we watch this unfold, as I said, a couple of those are going to be long, drawn-out fights that'll last most of the year. So we'll take a look and see. But those that we can come to a conclusion quickly, bring those back to you.
Right now, we do have a update scheduled June 1st.
And we may bring something back sooner, depending.
Sooner, yes. If
We always reserve that option as we
development,
talk to you
right.
about if something develops to get it to you
Right.
sooner, even if it's a single item that we bring back to you to discuss.
Right, and is that good enough, or would you like to
Well, I
put
think
one in
Commissioner
earlier?
Camargo was saying now these are just updates and information only, but we want to have an agenda item where we take action on recommending to council on a position. Would that maybe supersede what staff would recommend? Is that what you'd be interested in, Commissioner Camargo, or waiting?
Well, it could be based on staff recommendations. So most everything was still in the watch phase here, right? So you know, if we get to a place where we want to consider, either staff wants to consider taking action, or this commission wishes to take action on one of these bills, then I think we would need to do that, and probably need to do it relatively soon within the window in which the legislation is being considered.
And we'll, as I indicated, we'll put it on an action form so you can recommendation to council is what you would be making, not taking an action unilaterally.
Yeah, once it develops to the point where we're going to have a position, yeah, we definitely would hear about it at that point and then also make our recommendation.
So should we put it on the agenda for on a rolling basis here for the legislative term? Or what's the best way to capture this, you think?
I'll
moving
just make
forward?
sure that as it comes up, we'll put it on.
Okay.
Do it. We don't need to put it down. I'll just, if something pops up between now and our next meeting, I'll put it on the agenda. We'll action item, say this developed while over the last month on this particular piece of legislation, and then let you guys make a decision on what you want to do.
Okay. And then I suppose in addition, if any of the commissioners see something that you think you want to take action on,
Send me a note.
send a note, one note to Mr. Zern, and that's all it takes to get something onto an agenda,
We can do
correct?
that.
Well, it requires the president of the commission and/or you can decide in a meeting as long as you have two of you that want to put it on the agenda.
Shoot me an email.
Yeah, technically we can send an email to Commissioner Chan solely rather than.
Yeah, we don't want to end up in a situation where we have everyone on an email, but if
Right.
individually you contact the president, then
Right.
President Chan,
And
I'm
I
sure, will
will,
be happy
yeah,
to put it on.
send,
That works.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it on the forecast. Next item.
7, adjournment.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all say aye.
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 Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.